Hello and welcome to my channel. Today I have decided to do the classic creepypasta, the Russian sleep experiment. Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake so the gas doesn't kill them. Since it was highly toxic in high concentrations, this was before closed-circuit cameras, so they had only microphones and 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized windows in the chamber monitoring them. The chamber was stocked with books, cots to sleep on with no bedding, running water and toilets, and enough dried food to last all 5 of them over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during World War II. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained, having been promised falsely that they would be freed if they submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past, and the general tone of their conversation took a darker aspect after the 4th day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about circumstances and events that led them to where they were. They started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other and began alternatively whispering to the microphones in one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they seemed to think that they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades. The other subjects in captivity were with them. At first, the researchers suspected that this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber, repeatedly yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours. He continued attempts to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn out his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behavior is how the other captives reacted to it. Or rather, that they didn't react to it at all. They continued whispering to the microphones until the second of the captives started screaming. The 2 non-screaming captives took the books apart, smearing pages after pages with their own feces, and pasted them calmly onto glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped, so did the whispering in the microphones. After 3 days passed, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure that they were working, since they thought it was impossible that no sound could be coming from 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption of the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at a very high level of strenuous exercises. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something that they said they would not do to get their reaction from the captives. They used the intercoms inside the chamber, hoping to provoke an answer. They were afraid were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor, or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of your immediate freedoms." To their surprise, they heard a single phrase in a calm voice respond, "We no longer want to be freed." Debate broke out among the researchers and the military forces funding the research. Unable to provide any more responses using the intercom, it was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphone began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for their life or of loved ones. One to turn the gas on. The chamber was opened, and soldiers sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although one could rightly call the state that any of them were alive. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subject thighs and chest stuffed into the drain in the center of the chamber, blocking the drain and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of the water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth as the researchers initially thought. Close examination of the position and angles of the wound indicated that most of, if not all, were self-inflicted. Abdominal organs below the rib cages of all 4 test subjects had been removed, while the heart, lungs, and diaphragm remained in place. The skin and most of the muscle attached to their ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs. Through the rib cage, all the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and laid on the floor, fanned out around the excavated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tracts of all 4 could be seen to be working, digesting food. It quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that they had ripped off and eaten over the course of several days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. They continued to scream to be left in the chamber, and alternatively begging and demanding that the gas be turned back on lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out. Another was gravely injured by having his testicles removed and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another one of the soldiers lost their lives if you count ones that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggling, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen ruptured and he bled out almost immediately. The researchers attempted to sedate them, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of morphine. They writhed and still fought with it like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arms of one doctor. Then the heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out, to the point where there was nothing but air in his vascular system than blood. Even after he stopped, he screamed and flailed for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach, just repeating the word more over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility. The 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begged for gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had, in the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back into his body. It was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative that they had given him. Preparing him for the surgery, he fought fiercely against the restraints. When the anesthetic gas was brought out to him to put him under, he managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even though the weight of a 200-pound soldier was holding that wrist as well. It took only a few more anesthetics than normal to put him under, and instantly his eyelids fluttered and closed. His heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died in the operating table, it was found that his blood had tripled the normal amount of oxygen. His muscles that were attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle to not be sedated. Most of them were from the force of his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming. His vocal cords destroyed, he was unable to beg or object to surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when someone suggested reluctantly to try the surgery without anesthetic, and did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon started repeating that he should be medically impossible for this patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze loudly, attempting attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and paper fetched so the patient could write his message. It simply said, "Keep cutting." The other two subjects were given the same surgery, both without anesthesia as well, although they had to be injected with a paralysis for the duration of the operation. The surgeons found it was impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralyzed, the subject would only follow the attendant researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their system in an enormously short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asked for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried again why they had injured themselves, why had they ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was given: "I must remain awake." All three subjects restrained were reinforced. They were placed back into the chamber, awaiting determination as to what should be done with them. The researchers faced the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed the stated goal of their project. Considering euthanizing the surviving subjects, the commanding officer, a former KGB agent, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they had put them back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected but were overruled. In preparation to begin sealing the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, they stopped struggling. The moment it was let slip that they were going back on the gas, it was observed that at this point all three were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. All of the subjects that could speak were humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds with all his might. First left, then right, then left again, for something to focus on. The remaining subjects were was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to be wired to the EEG monitor of the researchers here monitoring his brainwaves in surprise. They were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatlined unexpectedly. It looked as if he was rapidly suffering brain death before returning to normal. As they focused on paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut. At the same moment, his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of a deep sleep, then flatlined for the last time as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brainwaves showed the same flat lines as one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside, as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. He pointed his gun at the remaining subjects, still restrained to a bed. As the remaining members of the medical and research teams fled the room, "It would be locked in here with these things, not with you," he screamed. "Have you forgotten so easily?" the subject asked. "We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal minds. We are what you hide from the bed. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go into nocturnal haven where we can't tread." The researcher paused, then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out. So nearly free. And thank you for listening to my first creepypasta. This is going to be one of many that will show up on this channel from now on. And I hope that my recording wasn't too bad and that I can get this all edited and nicely put together. Thank you very much for listening to my video and have a good night.